Hello and good evening. My name is Ben Mendoza, pronouns they, them. I'll be your moderator for this evening. Thank you for joining us as we commemorate and talk through the latest historic Supreme Court decision. We have experts and community leaders from around San Diego who will offer space for our community to come together, identify our next steps, and calls to action. To begin, we want to honor and respect Native and Indigenous peoples and their land on which San Diego resides. San Diego was built upon the territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. We recognize that the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land and that today the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. Though we are here today to talk about the Supreme Court victory, we don't want to start our program without acknowledging the losses within our own community. The lives of Dominique Remy Fells, Rhea Milton, and Tony McDade mattered. Black trans lives mattered. Black lives matter. Please join us in a moment of silence to recognize the precious and far too often lives lost. Thank you. We encourage you to engage in the comment section of Facebook and YouTube. Although we won't be answering any questions live, we will have members of our team who will do their best to answer questions as they come in. And if you are commenting, please refrain from rhetoric that is transphobic, anti-Black, or racist. We'll have ASL interpretation available throughout tonight's rally. Thank you to our wonderful interpreter, Suzanne, who will be with us tonight. For the agenda for tonight, we have a welcome, the legal perspective from the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial counties, as well as Lambda Legal. We'll have some community representatives. We'll have someone to offer a business perspective and how this decision affects local San Diego businesses. And finally, we'll have a call to action as well as next steps. Before we introduce our first speaker, I first want to thank all the organizations involved with planning tonight's program, the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial counties, Connor Maddox, Equality Business Alliance, North County LGBTQ Resource Center, PFLAG San Diego County, Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest, Lambda Legal, the San Diego Black LGBT+ Coalition, San Diego Pride, Stonewall Citizens Patrol, the San Diego LGBT Community Center, Tom Homan LGBT Law Association, Trans Family Support Services. So with that, I want to introduce our first speaker, the Chief Executive Officer of the San Diego LGBT Community Center, Kara Desert. Kara, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's an honor to be here with you all. So yesterday was a landmark day in American history as the Supreme Court held that employment discrimination against LGBTQ people violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So I'm going to say 5 things. First, I want to celebrate what a broad victory this is. This is a victory for all LGBTQ+ people who now have employment protections in all 50 states. I want to be real that the Supreme Court of the United States is rarely ahead of public opinion. And so this victory is a victory of the trans community who has told their stories, shared their lives, come out, been public, and fought to be vocal members of all communities and especially to fight for the T and the non-binary and LGBTQ. This is an incredible victory, and we would not be here with this victory without the trans community. Second, today we get to celebrate this victory standing on the shoulders of civil rights leaders of the 1960s and the women's rights movements who paved the way for the Civil Rights Act and for gender equality. This is the reason that we were able to argue that sex includes both sexual orientation and gender identity. Talking about what a broad, resounding victory this Supreme Court case is, I want to focus on a few things. One, the Supreme Court went out of its way to say in the majority opinion that the plaintiff's sex, so that now includes sexual orientation and gender identity, need not be the sole or primary cause of the adverse employment action. In other words, it doesn't matter if other factors were involved besides the plaintiff's sex that contributed to the decision, so long as sex was one of the reasons, that's enough to trigger the law. And that's really, really important because usually in employment discrimination cases, there are a number of reasons. Someone may get terminated or not hired or demoted. And what this court case is saying is that if someone's sexual orientation or gender identity is any part of the decision, that is illegal, that is prohibited, and the employee is protected under federal law in all 50 states. A hugely important part of this decision. I also want to talk about an argument that the other side made, that the people who wrote this law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, didn't imagine it applying to the transgender community. And so because they didn't imagine it applying to the transgender community, it shouldn't be interpreted to include the transgender community. I want to read you one of my favorite quotes. The limits of the drafter's imagination supply no reason to ignore the law's demands. Only the written word is the law, and all persons are entitled to its benefit. Here, the Supreme Court says yes, probably in 1964, the drafters weren't thinking that the word sex in Title VII would someday apply to the LGBTQ plus community, but the Supreme Court is saying that doesn't matter. It does apply. You cannot separate sex from sexual orientation and gender identity. And today, by a 6-3 majority, a huge victory, this law applies to the LGBTQ community. The last thing I want to say is this is an amazing victory. It's a broad holding that broadly protects all LGBTQ people in all 50 states. And this is also just one case about employment law. We are far from being done in our fight for LGBTQ equality. We have to keep on fighting to have legal rights and accessing healthcare in retail stores and restaurants, in adoption agencies and public accommodation, and in the fight for racial justice and for Black lives. Until our Black LGBTQ community and our trans LGBTQ community is treated with respect and dignity every day in all the institutions that one encounters, this fight is not over. Thank you all so much. It's an honor to be here. And I want to celebrate this incredible moment in our American history with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara. Before I throw it over to the folks at the ACLU and Lambda Legal, I do want to give a big thank you to the Deaf Community Services of San Diego, who is providing the ASL interpretation pro bono. So thank you so much. So now for the legal perspective, we have Melissa De Leon, who is an equity staff attorney at the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties, and Richard Siegel, a National Leadership Council member of Lambda Legal. So welcome, Melissa and Rich.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Ben. Melissa and I are going to tag team. I'm going to go first. And as Ben mentioned, my name is Rich Siegel. I'm a volunteer attorney with Lambda Legal based in New York. And my pronouns are him, his, and he. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about exactly what happened at the Supreme Court yesterday. Yesterday, the Supreme Court decided the fifth in a series of cases on LGBTQ plus rights starting back in 1996. And this is probably one of the most important ones ever decided. in a case called Bostock versus Clayton County. The court held 6-3, as Kara mentioned, in an opinion written by Justice Neil Gorsuch, who was Donald Trump's first appointee to the Supreme Court, that discrimination in employment because the employee is a member of our community, all right, is a violation of Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964. Put differently, for the first time, the Supreme Court held that discrimination against our community in employment violates federal law, not just state law. Now, the way this happened was that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination in employment because of sex. That's the language that's used. Beginning about 15 years ago, Lambda Legal, the ACLU, and some other advocacy groups representing our community have been arguing that discriminating against someone because that person is gay or lesbian or transgender or non-binary or otherwise a member of our community, completely inclusively, necessarily means that that is also discrimination because of sex. Yesterday, for the first time, the Supreme Court of the United States agreed, holding that you can't discriminate based on LGBTQ status without also necessarily discriminating because of sex and therefore violating Title VII. So, in other words, as of yesterday, sexual orientation discrimination and gender identity discrimination are sex discrimination and prohibited by federal law. Now, this is huge for a number of reasons. First of all, discrimination in employment against our community or any of its members is now illegal across the country and doesn't depend on state law anymore. In the 28 states that the day before yesterday had no protections in employment for members of our community, we are now protected by federal law. In addition, this decision affects almost everyone in our community because almost everyone in our community either has a job or is going to look for a job or is going to have a job at some point. So in that way, it's probably the most important opinion for our community since the 2003 Lawrence v. Texas opinion, where the Supreme Court said that it's unconstitutional to say merely being gay is illegal, is criminal. So this is, when it comes to the breadth of this decision, it is huge. It's not just people who want to get married, which is a subset. It's not just people who want to amend the state constitution, which is a subset. This is everyone, everywhere. And it's also notable because, like I said, there have been 5 major Supreme Court opinions addressing our community since 1996. And it's the first Supreme Court opinion that expressly addresses gender identity as well as sexual orientation. Gender identity had been ignored at the Supreme Court until yesterday. All right. What this does is it now allows all of us to be secure in knowing that we can't be fired simply because of who we are. And that's across the United States. Now, while this case addresses only discrimination in employment, discrimination because of sex is prohibited in around 150 federal laws on the books. All right. So your community advocates, Lambda Legal, the ACLU, and others, will use this decision to fight against discrimination against our community in all areas of the law going forward. And that could include education, healthcare, for example. So that's the quick summary. And at this point, I'll hand it off to Melissa. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to my kitchen. Thank you, Rich, for giving such a thorough synopsis regarding this very, very important decision. And it is remarkable that finally the court has made it unmistakably clear that federal law, in fact, prohibits discrimination on the basis of LGBTQ identity. And I think it's become especially clear in light of this global health crisis that we are in, and how necessarily linked healthcare is to employment, that this employment right is really a very, very significant foundational one for the LGBTQ community, for all people. And so we discussed earlier today where we are so elated that this is in fact, that the court got it right. And this is in fact the outcome of this case. And so we were going to discuss your rights under California law, but I'm going to pivot a little bit just to talk about some of the cases that we're working on, and some of the that issue and the reasons why enforcement of these laws are really also as important. The reality is that we know that having the legal rights does not always mean that folks are treated automatically safely or in non-discriminatory ways. I'll point to a case that we are litigating. We, the ACLU of San Diego and Southern California, along with our a private law firm, Nixon Peabody, we represent a transgender woman who's the plaintiff, Kristen Wood, in a complaint against Crunch Fitness in El Cajon for discrimination. And Ms. Wood is 62 years old. She is a transgender woman, and she, like many others, spent a lot of her life very fearful to express her identity and fearing the judgment and the discrimination. And a few years ago, with the support of friends and family, she developed more confidence and began to transition to live her life openly consistent with her authentic gender identity as a woman. Ms. Wood has also been a member of the gym Crunch Fitness in El Cajon for approximately 13 years. And when she joined 13 years ago, she became a member of the fitness community and found that she especially had a love for water aerobics. And she found a lot of friends in that community, and eventually went on to lose 100 pounds over the course of many years, and on doctor's recommendation, and it has changed her life. But unfortunately, her experience at Crunch changed after she began her transition. And she faced harassment in the men's locker room at the gym, and she reported it to the gym management, and they were aware that she was a transgender woman, but she was not given access to the women's locker room and bathroom. And one of the claims in Ms. Wood's complaint is a violation of California's anti-discrimination law under the UNRRA Civil Rights Act, which prohibits businesses open to the public from discriminating on the basis of sex, and expressly defines sex to include one's gender identity and gender expression. And I give you the background of that case to illustrate the fight that continues and the need still for enforcement. And even in the face of clearly established laws, California has had such laws on the books for 2 decades now, laws prohibiting discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression. Trans people, especially trans women of color, continue to face disproportionate discrimination in all avenues of life, in employment, in access to healthcare, in access to public accommodations. And it is critical that businesses follow the law, and that we as a community continue to help folks enforce their rights. We're going to be soon publishing a more sort of robust overview of the law of student protections in place in California, but we wanted to give you some background on that case, and really, again, shout out to our client, Kristen Wood. And as we all know, Black and brown women have led this movement, and that's why we're here. They're the ones that remain disproportionately impacted by discrimination, and so we will continue to work to fill all the gaps in the law.
Thank you so much, Rich and Melissa. Next up, we have our first community representative, Jeremy Wells, who is the Vice President of the San Diego Black LGBTQ Coalition. Say hello to Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ben. I'm Jeremy Wells, he, him, his pronouns. I'm Vice President of the San Diego Black LGBTQ Coalition, where we aim for a strong and connected Black LGBTQ community here in the city. I want to thank Jen from San Diego Pride, hi Jen, and the Rally Organizing Committee for inviting us to celebrate in this glorious moment. It's lit. I'm so happy for us. Level up, yes. As the coalition, we aim not only to survive, but to thrive in the intersection of both our capital B Blackness and our queerness. Even with the Supreme Court's decision, we know that things in the workforce won't shake out as evenly with Black trans people as it should. And it's extremely important that we celebrate the Supreme Court decision, but at the same time, we still have to remember that Black trans women are dying in jail cells. The experience of a white gay man and a Black trans woman in America are incredibly different from each other, and they will continue to be until we achieve true justice for all queer folks. There was actually a Black Trans Lives Matter rally in New York where Layleen Polanco's death was eulogized by her sister. Layleen was a Black trans woman who died of epileptic seizure in police custody. And her sister's quote, every time someone quotes the death of their family, especially, it resonates with me. And my heart always goes out to the families of those who are brutally taken too soon. But she said, my sister's life mattered. All of the loved ones we have lost, all of those beautiful girls that we have lost, their lives matter. We have to protect them. And there were marches to make this ruling happen. There were letters sent and email chains to make this ruling happen. There was hardcore, unrelenting activism to make this happen, and it did. This is something that we should happily celebrate, but the coalition encourages everybody to keep that same energy for our capital B Black queer siblings as well. We still have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. A great reminder that the work does not end today, doesn't end here. We continue on. So for our next community representatives, we have Deja Cabrera, who is the community health educator and advocate at the San Diego LGBT Community Center, and Naya Velasco, who is the transgender services coordinator, also at the San Diego LGBT Community Center. Hello, Naya and Deja.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Deja, and I am the community health educator and advocate at the San Diego LGBT Community Center. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I am so excited to celebrate the historic Supreme Court ruling, a huge victory for the entire LGBTQ+ community. LGBTQ+ folks are protected in all 50 states from workplace discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. With this exciting step forward, I must also remind folks that our work is not finished. Our nation has so much to do to dismantle both legal and cultural systems of racism. Additionally, there are crucial gaps in our federal non-description laws, such as housing, public accommodation, and healthcare. As a health and wellness advocate, I know firsthand from my clients and my own experience the challenges we face every day to have trans competent healthcare. Discrimination is an everyday experience for many trans people like myself and can affect nearly every area of life. The uncertainty that was created Friday with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services rule announcement will impact the lives of thousands of transgender people, especially trans people of color, who face higher rates of discrimination and violence. I look forward to getting more guidance from our legal and health partners about what exactly the AHS rule change means, especially for us Californians. And given yesterday's court's historic ruling, and the center will share out what the community has to come. In the meantime, we need Congress to fully protect LGBTQ+ people from discrimination and pass full federal non-discrimination protections, which means we all need to vote this November. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Deja, and thank you so much, Ben. Hello, everyone. My name is Naya Marie Velasco. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a proud, visible, transgender Chicana and first-generation American. I have the privilege and honor in serving as the Transgender Services Coordinator at the San Diego LGBT Community Center. Thank you, Ben, for taking a moment as we begin tonight to honor the 3 Black transgender lives lost within the past few weeks. Let us all say together, Black trans lives matter. How I truly wish you all were here to witness such a glorious moment in American history. Let us all remember the liberation Black transgender women provided us, and while why we're able to congregate here today. Yesterday was a historical victory for LGBTQ A2+ community members. But let me be clear, there is still a great deal of work to be done. The fight is not over. We are barely warmed up. I dream of living in an America where access to healthcare is not combated with bigotry. I dream of living in an America where I can hold my partner's hand without fear. I dream of living in an America where transgender, non-binary, and two-spirited youth are not put on the streets. I dream of living in an America where a Black father can return home safely from the corner store to be with his daughter. I dream of living in an America where not another Black trans woman's life is lost. I dream of living in America where Native Indigenous women are no longer go missing. I know that America exists, and I'm extremely empowered to work alongside this amazing community to make this dream a reality. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Naya. So now for the business perspective, Eddie Ray is the executive director of the Equality Business Alliance, and he'll be here to talk about what it's like from the business perspective in terms of local businesses here in San Diego. Take it away, Eddie.
Thank you, Ben, for having us, and thank you again for recognizing the moment in history that we are in and currently facing. As executive director of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce, I've been fortunate that I was able to be inside the Supreme Court during oral arguments this past October. So I want us to be here celebrating this historic moment and this historic day, not just for our community, but for everything that's happening right now. Even in the midst of COVID and Black Lives Matter, we're finding slivers of hope, and I want us to celebrate those moments. However, I also want you to know that our fight is not over. The court's 6-3 decision to protect LGBTQ people in the workplace is a historic and landmark ruling. Rich said earlier that it's probably an equal importance as the Lawrence ruling in 1990 or 2004, excuse me. The difference between this one and marriage equality is that marriage equality was a very emotional battle for us. Workplace employment here in California wasn't a battle for us because we already had those protections. But for hundreds of thousands of people across the nation, that battle was very real for them. So we must continue to keep that battle moving forward. This ruling sends the message that LGBTQ Americans are a vital part of the United States economy and that we deserve equal treatment under the law. Here at the Chamber, we know that the business community has often been the last little push to change public opinion. We know that corporate support is that little push that gets us over the hill of public support, public opinion. So we encourage you to continue to support small businesses, especially our LGBT businesses here in San Diego. As your LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce and Tourism, we'll continue to lead that fight here locally. We want our business community's voices to be heard, whether it's on a regional, local, or national level. We'll do everything we can to be there and to be your voice. But we also know, again, that our march is not over. We know that threats of violence and discrimination and anti-LGBT laws can have a profound effect on LGBT employees, including anyone within the LGBT community. The mental health that people go through, the crisis that these laws put people in, often results in absenteeism, low productivity, inadequate training, and higher turnover in the workplace. That all makes for higher labor costs and lower profits. However, with this ruling, my concern is that Gorsuch has left open a crack for religious freedom. So that little crack in his statement, in his opinion, has protected us in terms of private employment. But now our battle begins with religious freedom. So we must continue to demand from our representatives, from our senators, that they support the Equality Act, and that burden truly falls on them. It falls on Congress. So I urge you, register to vote, register your neighbors, register your families to vote, and get out and support the cause. From a business standpoint, we encourage you to join a chamber of commerce. It doesn't have to be ours, it could be any chamber. Just join a chamber. Your voice as a business member has a profound effect on public opinion. And that's something that we all need to keep in our minds. We're here for you as a chamber here locally and the visitor center. So if you're interested in that, you can always give us a call. Our phone number is 619-432-LGBT. But more importantly, we believe that to ensure the LGBT community remains an important part of our workforce, we need to have full inclusion. So again, I cannot state it enough. We need your support in contacting our representatives, our state senators, our local elected officials, and urge them to support the Equality Act. It's sitting on the senator's desk in DC, and we need to get that passed. We need it to become law. So get out and vote. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me. And also thank you to all of the committee members that have been a part of making this happen for us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Our final speaker for tonight to talk about call to action and next steps is the Executive Director of San Diego LGBT Pride, Fernando Lopez. Hello, Fernando.
Hola, buenas noches, ¿cómo estás? Hola, me llamo Fernando Lopez, soy Director Ejecutivo de Orgullo San Diego. Hello, good evening, my name is Fernando Lopez, and I'm the Executive Director of San Diego Pride. I'm a non-binary, queer, Latinx, Jewish, multi-ethnic, first-generation U.S. citizen, former homeless youth, and rape survivor. We have to tell our personal stories. That's how you change hearts and minds. I met my ex-husband, Michael, when I was 19 and he was 21. This was almost 20 years ago. The laws were very different back then. At the time, we quickly considered ourselves married because we knew we couldn't legally get married. And soon it became the little things that we noticed that we weren't treated equally, we weren't treated fairly. We couldn't be on each other's health insurance or car insurance. My husband, Michael, was fired 3 times in 2 years. And with health insurance tied to employment, it made it hard for him and for us to take care of each other. My husband became sick and collapsed at work. I had to take him to the emergency room myself because his employer wouldn't take him or call 911. When I took him to the emergency room, they wouldn't let me through the door. They said that only family was allowed in. I didn't qualify. The laws were different back then. When I was finally allowed in, I wasn't allowed to make medical decisions because, again, the laws were different back then. My employer called me day after day and finally threatened to fire me if I didn't go into work that day because I was there taking care of my sick husband. The laws were different back then. My husband eventually got better, but I quit my job and I committed myself to this work. And thankfully, my husband made enough money at the time that I was able to volunteer my time for this work. I educated myself, I studied really hard, and actually I learned a lot about gender equity law and insurance non-discrimination policy. And that helped me fight for marriage and the freedom to marry. And a lot of the LGBTQ pieces of legislation that we have now, as I worked with Equality California, the Victory Fund, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, our LGBT Community Center, and now San Diego Pride. Through those organizations and by the power that each of us have ourselves, we can tell our own personal stories. It's so important to accept the joy of this day and the celebration that we all want to feel and know that we have all worked so hard for generations to build to this moment. But we also have to be honest with ourselves and with those around us about the deep disparities that still exist within the LGBT community all across the country and all over the world, and how much further we have to go for, in particular, our trans and non-binary communities and our people of color communities, and especially our Black community. So what we're asking all of you to do is to take to social media, hold up your camera, go live on Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media platform and tell your personal story. How have you been discriminated against? What's the oppression that you have felt? And be honest with those around you about the struggle. Tell your elected officials about what you're experiencing on your in your daily lives. Write op-eds for your local LGBT publications and your non-LGBT publications. You have to tell your personal story. Yes, we want you to go out and register to vote. Yes, we want you to actually show up to the polls and vote. Voting matters. Yes, we want you to complete the census and make sure every one of your friends, family, and neighbors has completed the census. Yes, we want you to learn about the Equality Act and all the other legal disparities that still exist for our community and for our progressive and intersectional movements. We have a lot of work to do, but that work is fueled by our personal stories. I've shared a piece of mine with yours, and I hope that you will take a moment today to share a piece of your personal story with the world. Your story is your power. Share it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you to the planning committee for putting tonight's event together. With so much love, I bid you all a good night.